and then we'll also have them on our Twitter and on Facebook.
Cool.
And we're streaming on YouTube as well. So there will be lots of opportunities out there. I'm only watching right now on Facebook. So if anybody is on there, you can say hello, say what's up, and I will say hello, what's up back to you. This is a different thing than what we're used to doing here on the stream because I usually go on Thursdays. But I am going out of town to the boonies in East Texas, and I will be in seclusion with no cell service whatsoever. So this is the only opportunity we have to go over it. And it's an exciting day for you because it's your actual launch date for the book.
Yeah.
Which, congratulations. And also congratulations on the giant bone discovery you found.
Yeah, it was really, it's been a big day all around.
Yeah. Okay. So we've already started the broadcast, so we are good to go. Just a reminder for anybody who is new to Get Vocal. Remember, if you join us on Get Vocal, you should subscribe to my channel or to Rachel's channel. Just send me a DM on any of our social media platforms or tcfcpod@gmail.com, and you will get a ton of TCFC goodies. But what's special about this broadcast is we are actually giving away a copy of Rachel's book, Savage Appetites, which I have not been able to put down, and I'm really, really into it. And I think that if you are a true crime reader, you are absolutely going to love this book. And I will be announcing the winner next week of the book giveaway. So make sure you stay tuned to learn how to enter. So Rachel, go ahead and give us a background on you and kind of tell us a little bit about how you started in becoming an author and what got you into true crime, that type of stuff.
Sure. Well, I mean, I think, I was into true crime before I ever thought about being a writer, of true crime or anything, honestly. I mean, that was like something that I think it dates back to like my early teens, preteen era, just because I was like sort of a misfit kid, felt totally like an outsider and a weirdo. And like,
I think we can relate.
Exactly. I think it's funny because I think there's so many people out there now who feel like that. And it's like, why couldn't we have all hung out when we were 11? I think we outnumber the rest of them. But yeah, so that was just something that was always kind of in the back of my head. Like whenever, particularly, I always noticed like if I was in a period where I felt like depressed or kind of freaked out about the future, that's when I would just binge, Law and Order, SVU, or like, big, thick true crime books. Like it didn't even really matter. I just like, I want like a big paperback that's gonna just completely take over my life for a few days. And then I started becoming a journalist, doing more and more journalistic type writing when I moved to Texas, pretty much, about 8 years ago. And I started writing some crime stories just as journalism because they interested me.
Mm-hmm.
They're kind of fun to do. But I always felt like there was like another level. I could tell a story about something that happened and kind of delve into the dynamics of that situation. This girl who got kidnapped or this guy who murdered his friend, but it felt like there were these larger questions that I couldn't quite, I didn't have the space to grapple with.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I started to feel like, oh, okay, maybe a book is the right shape to kind of think about things like at more like, why do I find these stories, these like really terrible stories, why do I find them not just interesting, but like kind of pleasurable in a way, that's like an uncomfortable feeling, but it's something that was in me, and I started to look around and see it was in a lot of other people too. And it felt like nobody had really, I hadn't found any really like satisfying explanations or anybody kind of digging into it. So
yeah.
Like, well, okay,
no, that's very true. And I think a lot of us feel that way for why we engage so much in true crime, either with creators of podcasts or authors of books. We just want to kind of get as much as possible. And I used to always get like, oh, doesn't that just bring you down? I'm like, actually, no, it's so fascinating. Like it kind of invigorates me because I
Mm.
want to know so much about the psychology of it. Like I can't imagine that people like this exist. So in reading your book, I noticed that you kind of started around the same age I did with learning about true crime and what it was, and me not realizing that it was actually a real thing that happened. I kind of
Yeah,
just
really.
disassociated from murders and stuff. And I was like, oh, that's what people and their families, like, that's just what happens. And I didn't realize like what a serial killer was, or that there are these, people out there who kill at random, really. And you were talking about the book that taught you about, oh my gosh, what was it? It was oh my gosh, it just left my brain. Asphyxiation, like autoerotic
Oh.
asphyxiation. And I was like, that's the same thing I did. Like I had no idea what like incest was. And one of the first books I read when I was 12 was House of Secrets by Lowell Caulfield. And it's one of my favorite books to read, and what I recommend for somebody kind of starting in true crime. I'm like, if you want to get into true crime, if you can
Yeah.
stomach this is what you need to read. So we started at the same time, and I saw kind of the dialogue going on of how you, your mom was into true detective magazines and things like that. I'm like, my family was the same way, but that also made them really paranoid about
Mhm.
your safety. So my mom would be like, somebody's going to take you and somebody's
Yeah.
going to kidnap you off the street. And I'm like, okay, well, why are you reading this if that's what's going to happen to me? Like, I don't get it. But then once I started reading true crime, I was like, oh, okay, I get it. And so that started my own fascination with things. So what was the case, I guess, or was there a case that led you to go, you know what? I need to figure out what makes these like four different profiles of people, because we're going to talk about that in just a little bit. But what kind of sparked your, idea? I always say, like, what's your aha moment to figure out, hey, I'm ready to write this book?
Well, I think, the one that had stuck with me for a long time, because sometimes I think I'm like a lot of writers. Like sometimes I'll be obsessed with something. Like being a writer is such a good job, for probably a podcaster too. Like if there's something that you're obsessed with, you
Oh
can
yeah.
you're like, I have to be obsessed with this for the next 2 weeks or 2 months or whatever. It's my job. So I would so writing has been really good for me because I can get obsessed with something and then usually I can let it go and get obsessed with something else. And the one that it was really interesting to me, the Manson family is something that I had, like one of the first books that I read when I was too young, Helter Skelter. And that's one of the ones that's really stuck with me. I've written about it a lot. And instead of that making me feel like, okay, good, I like kind of worked that out, I got it out of my system, it just makes me want to think about it more. And there's so many different elements to that, like the Charles Manson himself, I don't find all that interesting.
Yeah, no, not at all. Yeah.
But the Manson girls, the young women, just the involvement of Hollywood. And then I became really fascinated with, there are all these people who even now, years later, are like obsessed with the Manson family. And so all of that stuff. So that for me was like a really key story. I also saw how it influenced culture a lot.
Mm-hmm.
This wasn't the case because I think sometimes people think of true crime like, oh, that's just this like trashy tabloid stuff. It's like, it doesn't really matter.
Right.
But one of the things I wanted to do in my book is like, think about like, no, these stories, particularly ones like the Manson family or Columbine, these ones that get so big, they really shape our culture, our society, our politics. And so we lose out a lot if we just kind of dismiss it as not worth thinking about. So that, definitely the big one for me probably was the Manson murder.
But not necessarily with Charles, which I agree with, because if you kind of really delve into it and look past Charles, you're like, wow, how did you end up here? How did this happen? So I totally get that for sure. So as we delve into the book, again, reminder that it is out today. Congratulations. Amazing. You have 4 roles that you discuss in this book that you give us examples over. So we have the detective, the victim, the defender, and the killer. I want to make sure I didn't mess it up. So I don't want to give any spoilers. And for true crime aficionados, much like the people who listen to my show, probably read your books. They may know these stories, so I don't really want to go into depth and spoil it for anybody who has not heard of these stories yet. But if you could, just give us an example of the stories you touch on for some of your roles in the book, and then kind of what role fascinates you the most out of those.
Ooh. It's going to be hard for me to pick one, but I guess, I think one that maybe people know about but don't necessarily know about in this particular way is I wrote about the West Memphis 3, which is a case that has gotten a lot of attention. There have been a number of books, a ton of documentaries, and this was this story of these 3 8-year-old boys who were killed in West Memphis, Arkansas in the early 90s, like a really brutal killing.
Yeah.
And the town very quickly, the police there seized on and arrested 3 teenagers who were kind of the local misfits. They listened to Metallica or whatever.
Wore black.
Yeah, exactly. They wore black, and they were, it's easy to relate to them, I think.
Yeah.
And based on, and essentially no physical evidence, no kind of motive really, these teenagers did not know these children or have any relationship with them. And so the motive that they came up with was oh no, it must have been a satanic ritual because these kids, wore black. So clearly, and this was sort of the tail end of this period known as the Satanic Panic. And it's not a spoiler for my book, I guess, to say that 2 of those teenagers were sentenced to life in prison, and one was put on death row for these crimes. And so that story has kind of been told over and over again. But what I was interested in was this woman named Lori Davis, who saw one of these documentaries. And I think a lot of us, just got totally drawn into the case and found it really fascinating and thought it was really terrible that these teenagers had been arrested based on no evidence. And so she just gets drawn into this case pretty much kind of as far as you can go, basically.
Yeah.
And so that to me was a story that was really interesting because, I'm writing about true crime, but I'm also writing about people I'm more than that. I'm writing about people who are obsessed with true crime and how that impacts their lives. And so Lori Davis is a person who, her just watching this documentary and learning about this case shaped the rest of her life, to this day.
Yeah. It's pretty intense how I guess focused advocates get, and it could just be from one thing. So we had Serial happen and it blew up, the Adnan Syed case. And so that, started a lot more things with the podcast that his best friend's sister does now, Rabia. So she, advocates for him. And then there's more people that have joined, like John Cryer gets on Undisclosed too. And it's just not the overlap that you expect, right? You don't expect these celebrities to get involved and to help, much like with the West Memphis 3, we had, a lot of celebrities like Johnny Depp getting involved and wanting to voice for them because they felt they were being railroaded. Now, I will tell you in the true crime community that case is hotly debated all of the time.
If you look at the evidence, though, it's anyway.
Yeah. So, debate. Everybody likes to find something in it. I am of the camp that these guys did not do it, but there are people who are not in that camp, which I don't get. But not shading anybody. I just don't understand how you get there.
That's important to put up.
Yeah, I don't get it, but it's okay. So I was really interested in the killer perspective or the killer profile that you mentioned in the book. So I kind of how did you pick that case? What made you?
And then
Oh,
you asked earlier,
yeah.
you asked earlier about like the one that kind of sticks in my head the most, and it's probably this this chapter or this section, which a lot of people have told me is like the most disturbing, because some of the stories in this book are like kind of dark. They're dark, but they're like uplifting in a way, or they're like affirming. And this one is like pretty much just like, oh no, this is like
this is dark. Yeah.
So this chapter is about a young woman, and I actually before I knew about her, I knew about this online community that she was a member of, which is the Columbiners, which your audience might be familiar with, but just in case they're not, it's like these mostly like young girls on Tumblr who have crushes on the Columbine killers. So they're like essentially like a fandom of Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold. And yeah, it's like pretty mind blowing. And I found them. I remember it so clearly. Like this one night in 2012, I stumbled into this Tumblr community.
Oh wow!
And it was huge. I was like, wow, there are hundreds, if not more than hundreds, of girls. Most of them seeming like quite young.
Yeah.
I remember I was in high school when Columbine happened, so it was super visceral to me. And these girls are standing,
Yeah.
These guys and posting sometimes these like really gruesome pictures. There are evidence photos of the two Columbine killers after they shot themselves, and they'd have that photo with like hearts all over it.
Yeah.
And it's like, whoa, what is going on here? So I wrote about that, and this is like another one that I was like, this is really fascinating, and I kind of need to keep thinking about it. And so I thought I was just kind of obsessed with that world. And then a few years later, like after I had kind of done all this research and written about it and interviewed a bunch of Columbiners, I learned that some members of that community had gone out and planned a mass shooting in Nova Scotia.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them was dead and one of them was arrested. And that's when I was sort of like, whoa, I need to figure out what's going on here, because this is this thing that I was looking into taken to its most extreme extent. And that was honestly, as like a researcher, it was very disturbing, but also really fascinating, because the two people who planned this shooting, they had met online. They never met in real life, and their whole relationship happened over Facebook chat.
Oh, wow.
And all of the Facebook chats were entered into evidence. And so I went to the court, and it's funny because it was in Canada, so there like really were not that. There were only a handful of Canadian reporters there. And if you figure if this case had happened in the U.S., it would have been huge. But it's sure. like over a national border, so people don't pay attention. So I was like, "Can I see those chat logs?" And it was like like thousands of pages, and they let me sit in there and just like read this whole relationship as it happened over these weeks, kind of developing as they start to kind of feel each other out. So the psychology is really there on the page in a way that's a lot of times when people are like planning a mass shooting, if it's a solo killer, you don't know what's going on. Maybe they write a manifesto, but their manifestos are always like just full of bullshit.
Yeah.
And so in this, you have two people talking to each other, like psyching each other up, talking through their ideas. And so you really see this idea gestate and form. And so there's something really compelling about seeing that, like, how does that happen? But also really, really creepy. Like that one, I don't know. I had kind of thought, I don't know how you feel, but I'm sort of like, oh, I think about this stuff all the time. It doesn't bother me anymore. And I was like, I'm freaked out.
Yeah. No, when it depends on the type of case that it is. So on the show, I don't really cover any type of random mass murder. So I haven't covered, I did it a long time ago, but my content editor is the one who hosted that episode, because I can't deal with those types of crimes. It's terrifying. And you would think that doing this as long as I've been doing it and covering pretty gruesome topics, that there wouldn't be something that I shy away from. But when it comes to random mass shootings, when I think about Aurora and I'm like, wow, I was just sitting in a theater, watching a movie, so many months ago and didn't think twice about somebody walking in from the exit. And now everybody who gets up in a movie theater, you're like looking at them like, are you going to be the one that does this? And so that just creates a lot of anxiety for me. And so it's not something that I ever want to research, but I'm not blind to it, if that makes sense. So I acknowledge that they happen, and I acknowledge that if it's going to happen and I'm there, then there's really nothing I can do to prevent that. But I don't need to psych myself up to be like, is it going to be you? Is it going to be you? But my researcher and my content editor, she finds those cases so fascinating. Like, she could read about them all day and is like, yeah, I would love to cover more. And I'm like, you can do it. Like, I'm happy to give you an episode if you'd like to, but there's no way that I could do it myself. But yeah, that one, those are a little harder for me to read, but it was really enthralling because I was like, there's somebody else doing this research and laying it out for me, so I don't have to go back and look, because I was that type of person where I would, if I was listening to a show or something, I wanted to Google everything immediately and look at the crime scene photos. But after doing it for so long, it's just like, there's no point. Like, a tragedy is a tragedy, and you don't need the pictures to prove that, which is the same reason why we don't often include audio 911 calls in the podcast.
I think that's really, whenever I hear them in a podcast, I understand why people do it, but you feel like, I don't know, I just put myself in that position. Would I ever want my voice or my mother's voice or my brother's voice, in that sort of terrible moment?
It's bad. It's not great. There are some shows that do it. I get it. Understand why they do it. And there are some listeners that like hearing those. They feel, a little bit more connected to the crime, or it feels more real to them. I understand that. We typically include court audio. So things that were, public record already, that you don't have to go through a FOIA request to get. You can just easily pull it up. So yeah, those are hard to listen to. I've heard some really terrible, 911 calls, and I know that people enjoy those, but I think I was, I think the same way you do. If it was me, or if it was one of my family members, I wouldn't want that out. So how would you feel though, if one of the subjects in your books had written you and was like, hey, take me out of your book. I don't want to be involved in this. Or could you stop writing about me?
Well, I got to be careful what I say. That didn't exactly happen like that, but not everybody that I have written about is happy.
Oh yeah.
To have
podcasters understand your pain.
And I guess all I can say is that the nice thing that you have when you write a book is that you've got a team of lawyers there, and they like look over everything. And, there's like, when people have been convicted of a crime, you can, they make themselves public figures in a certain way. Right. And when people make themselves into public figures, you can write about them then too, because they've kind of put themselves out there in the world, as long as you are scrupulous about doing it right.
Yeah, so, I agree.
It's really tricky though, like, how do you feel like
it's
our job involves invading people's privacy? And I don't know, I think that for me, at least, what I try to kind of weigh it and say, like, is this worth it? Am I just doing this to be trashy and sensational? Then it's not worth it. But if I'm kind of trying to build some larger point, and if I'm talking about things that are already out there in public, it's not like I'm
perpetuating it. And
exactly.
Really, no, we get a lot of the same things as podcasters. I think where we have kind of that freedom is it's easy for us to take an episode down versus having to pull an article from the internet and be like, yeah, sure, that never happened. But it's easy to kind of pull stuff like from our end. We've had that happen. A bunch of my friends, we tend to not contact victims' families because you just don't know how it's going to go. There are some who are grateful that you've shared their story, and then there are others who don't want you to share their loved one's story because it's too painful. And we totally get that. And I think the majority of us, if that does happen, if we get a family member that reaches out, we'll pull the podcast, like, no problem. If they feel that it was disrespectful in any way or anything like that. But I wanted to go back real quick because you mentioning the Columbiners brought something interesting up in my brain. When I first started the show, and I created, my Instagram page, I got a lot of followers who were really into being in love with serial killers. And I also had this young girl, she was maybe 13 or 14, who, I forgot what the first name was. It was like Lottie or something like that. Like it was a different first name, but she had Kleboid as her last name. And she was constantly posting in her stories, like pictures of the boys and, like hearts and different killers and things like that. And was like, oh, he's so handsome, like Richard Ramirez, and being like, I'm in love with him, or he's my baby, or something like that. And it was just like, they were treating it like a teen idol, like this is the only equation I have is like somebody from the Backstreet Boys, right? Where you're sitting there posting on them being like, oh my God, I love Nick. And I couldn't believe it because I was like, I'm, in my late 20s, early 30s at the time when I started the show. And I was just like, I want to call this kid's parents and be like, do you know your kid is sitting here on, a public platform saying these things about two men who took, a bunch of people's lives and created this terrible history, and precedents for school shootings, unfortunately. But yeah, I found that incredibly interesting. And I didn't interact with her. I think she still follows me. So no shade, homie, if you're watching on the air, but it did freak me out because I was just like, that's so sad because we could have gone a different way too. If we would have found the fascination with these killers and turned it into adoration, then we would I can see how that can happen, right? I guess.
Yeah. And I think that's why, especially when I was first writing about the Columbiners, there was a part of me that felt really sympathetic to them, and not sympathetic in that I agreed with how they were looking at things. But I thought back to like when I was 12 and 13 and had, thank God it was before
the internet was like crazy.
Internet forever, so like God only knows what I would have.
Yeah.
But I think there's a way, especially for like young and like teen and preteen girls, we're not given that many models for like how to be fascinated with something. Yeah. And the crush, like so many girls that I know have these really intense crushes that are not so much about the person that they actually have a crush on. I mean, I write in the book, like my friend Emily had this huge crush on Paul McCartney, and we're like, Paul McCartney's like 70 years old.
Yeah.
Like what? And it was like, oh no, what she really wanted was and now she's a professional musician, but like she couldn't, for some reason, saying like, I want to play the guitar was too threatening in a way. So she had to kind of say it in this like roundabout way. Like, I have a crush on this guy who plays the guitar. Yeah. And so I think often, and I know it was that way for me when I was young, like the crushes that I had, they were sort of like a conduit for my feelings, and it wasn't
the person. It was the feeling.
Right. It was the person. It wasn't the person. It was the feeling. And so, I think that, and I talked to some, I wish I had talked to more of these girls who I had talked to back in 2012 for Columbine. And, 8 years later or whatever, basically none of them were still posting in this way, but some of them, you could sort of follow them through Tumblr, like, oh, you became a criminal justice major, you became a psychology major, you became an activist in some way. And so it's like there's something in them where this story, and I do think that for people who are like much younger than us, who were like really little when Columbine happened, it almost feels like a myth or a movie
Right.
or something. They don't, it's hard to remember that it was real. And I also think that the first season of American Horror Story came out like around the time.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So you're putting a TV show with a like hot school shooter on it.
Right.
You know, like he's like the love interest. What do you think? How do you expect, you know, in a way, our culture, and that's the other thing is, so I don't want to blame these girls too much because, and I write about this in the book too, our culture in a way is, or corners of our culture are totally obsessed with serial killers and make them into these celebrities.
Right.
And make them into, and so when you make somebody into a celebrity, you kind of can't be shocked if they get groupies,
right?
You know,
yeah.
And that's, people pick up on that fame and that fascination, and it gets expressed as like, ooh,
adoration.
Yeah. And so it's, sometimes I feel like I don't want to just like yell at the 12-year-old girls and the rest of us off the hook. You know? Like that's not the person who needs to be.
Yeah, it's kind of, it's interesting because, you know, I can say the same thing about myself. I went to the Museum of Death, right, in LA, and I was like, oh, cool, it's going to be great and awesome. And then I was completely overwhelmed when all that stuff is there, because it's the same way, like you were saying, like, I don't remember Jeffrey Dahmer. I wasn't even born. So that doesn't impact me the way it would my mom, right? Who knows, and like with the Night Stalker and things like that, or now with the Golden State Killer, like people who actively remember him, you know, being in their area and being fearful that he was going to strike their homes. And then now seeing this pretend fake, feeble old man, which he is not, you know, sitting there kind of with his mouth open, like, you know, he's a victim of some sort. And I just was like, I was in that museum, and I mean, like, it is insanely graphic. So if you go, like, high trigger warning for you, because it shows everything, like, and it's the Museum of Death. It's not just serial killers and things like that, but it is a lot of horrible deaths around the world, if you will, you know? So going through that, I was like, oh, I wasn't prepared to see that. Like, I thought I was just going to see things I was already used to seeing, you know? And it was a lot to take in. And I was like, I don't ever want to go here again. And there are people who love going there, who will go there every single time, you know, they go to LA and stuff. And I'm like, I never want to go there again in my life. Because it was just, have you been there before?
Yeah, but not for a long time. I remember the Heaven's Gate.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That was there too. So like that was fine, because I was like, oh, that's interesting to see like how they were positioned and to see their clothing and stuff like that. But it's another thing to go and see like the crime scenes and the bloody things that they've had and collected from the crime scenes. Like that's a little different to me. It's not like Ghost Adventures, you know, where this thing is haunted and nothing happens and you just see it. It is actually, you know, something that was involved in somebody's death. So yeah, it was really interesting, an interesting experience for me to take that in, because I was so amped to go, and I was like, yes, this is the ultimate thing in like true crime, is to go to the Museum of Death, and you know, you take this pilgrimage there, if you will. And then as soon as I got there, I was like, oh, I hate this, and I felt weird for not liking it. I felt like I should have liked it.
Yeah, I know what you mean. And I think I write a little bit in the book. I had like a similar experience at CrimeCon, where at first I was like, this is all the crime I could want. This is perfect. And then at a certain point I was like, this is too much. And it's like, in a weird way, like too fun. And that's, there's some cognitive dissonance. And I don't know, I always want to retain my ability to be shocked and horrified, you know, if I felt like that part of me, or like sad or upset, you know, about these stories, because that's how we should respond.
Right.
And I think when I start to feel that kind of desensitization in myself, then I have to be like, whoa, you know, what's going on? Am I like, am I going too deep into this true crime?
Yeah, I agree. I went to CrimeCon the first year, and I think the second year in Nashville. So I was there too, but it took on a really different vibe the second year from the first year.
Really?
So the first year, it was really it was really like focused on advocacy. There were some, different things that popped up that were kind of, come and see this or talk to this person and learn about this. But it was a lot of informational things that really fascinated you. Like we had Joe Ronson there who was talking about, the psychopath and everything like that and how he may be one and blah, 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 blah. So we were like, wow, this is really fascinating. This is really cool. And then the second year you go in, and then I think that's when it became sponsored by Oxygen, I think, by that point, or it was more prominent than it was the year before. So a lot of it had changed into something that was more commercial, right? So these are the people who are going to watch Investigation Discovery and going to watch Oxygen, but don't really get into the depths of the true crime research like most people who get involved with true crime or listen to podcasts. It's like they're researchers in and of themselves. So as soon as they hear something, they're like, oh, I want to hear how, you tell this story, but I also want to read about it on my own too and like find out as much information as possible. Yeah. That's not always the crime con attendee, right? This is somebody who's like, oh, let me get some wine and watch it with my girls on a Saturday night, It's an unwinding kind of thing, and it's not bad. Like I realize that there are so many different types of listeners for true crime. There are some who love comedy true crime, and those who love the really gruesome true crime, and those who like the mix of the true crime and paranormal together. Like there's so many different types of listeners out there. But what threw me off for the second year was that it was really commercialized for a standard person who was, that person sitting on the couch drinking wine and being like, ooh, isn't that murder silly? And having like jails and having, like, how would you kill somebody? Or, what are you here for? And things like that. And there was some controversy, I think, with the last one they had, where they had people posing in a jail cell. And with the incarceration and the way that, there are people who take jail reform very, very seriously and prison reform very seriously, that kind of rubbed them the wrong way. And it's just like, you have to understand who's going to be there, but you have victims' families who are there, or victims of crimes too. And you're seeing people take pictures in a jail cell like it's a fun thing to do, so it was really odd in terms of that. And I say that because CrimeCon knows I don't like them right now, so it's fine.
It wasn't, I had a confusing experience too, because it certainly wasn't entirely bad. And I think if I had really hated it, that would have been easy in a way. But it was this mix of like, it was almost right. And then, this feeling of like,
yeah, exactly it. But yeah, we went there in terms of podcasters. We went there to hang out with our listeners and hang out with other podcasters. So none of us really, I think the second year didn't really go to any of the things because we were just like, yeah, let's go hang out in the bar. So it was an expensive trip to hang out with your friends for a weekend.
Was supposed to be on a cruise or something? The next one was supposed to be on a cruise?
Pass. There's no way in my life. I would never go on a cruise anyways, because I always hear these terrible stories. I'm like, you have people who, especially with the COVID situation, unfortunately, who were stuck out for 6 weeks, in the middle of the ocean.
Like it's a setting for a murder mystery.
Yeah. And there have been cruise ship murders before. So I think Amy Bradley is one of the most prominent cruise ship disappearances, is where she disappeared off of the cruise. And they believe, there's multiple theories out there about her, that she was either human trafficked or that she was murdered and disposed of and thrown over. There's too much to happen on a cruise ship that it goes against my safety rules, if you will.
Right.
So what do you want people to get from the book whenever they read it? Because I got something completely different than I thought I was going to get, because I thought it was really going to be just a, here are these stories about women and da-da-da. But the way that you go into them and the way that you tell them and kind of offer this really interesting examination of these different roles, I was not expecting that. So what are you hoping that readers get from this book?
That's a really good question. I guess in some ways I hope people come out of it with like more questions and thoughts of their own, and that it spurs discussions in a way. Sometimes people will ask me, and I appreciate that you haven't. Like, so why do women love true crime? And it's like, well, if I had a one sentence answer for you, I wouldn't have written a book about it, because I do think this is a subject that's often treated as something that's really simple or obvious, when I think it's like very layered and different between people, just like you're saying, like people are drawn to so many different kinds of stories that it evokes different emotional responses. And so kind of trying to generalize, I don't think makes sense. So I guess I was trying to, so part of it was looking at other people's obsessions and seeing what parts of me kind of resonated, like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Like I could totally imagine myself, there's a part of me, like a uncomfortable part of me, that can imagine myself as a 12-year-old on Tumblr, like maybe having fallen into the Columbine world, or I can really relate to somebody devoting her life to wrongful conviction and trying to like exonerate somebody. Right. And so seeing where I did relate and then where I didn't relate. So that's, I guess I hope people can maybe look at it and sort of maybe understand more of like, what is it in them that is drawing them to true crime? That's part of it. And then I think the other part is just kind of thinking about how the stories that we tell and the stories that we don't tell don't just shape us personally, but also have this effect on our politics and our culture and our society. And so thinking about, who gets represented as a victim and who is left out of the world of true crime victims, what stories get told over and over and over again, and why, and what stories never get told, and how that shape as a society, if there's so many of us watching true crime all the time, as the Oxygen tagline is, but we're getting in some ways like a very distorted picture, through which cases like fit into the true crime format. How does that affect us, and like how we all relate to the world? And so I wanted to on that level too.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, because there are a lot of people who get their panties in a wad over missing white girl syndrome, right? Because you hear a lot about these stories of women or young women who are abducted and murdered. But the stories that really kind of make those headlines are Caucasian women, non-people of color, if you will. And you could have the exact same thing happen, or other victims of this person come forward. And if they're a person of color, they're often, kind of pushed to the side, or being like, oh, this person's way more interesting because they have a better story to tell. Like, you put yourself in that situation because of your lifestyle or whatever. But this person, it makes no sense for them. And the thing is that there's no perfect victim for a case, right? There's no be like, oh, well, you're poor, so obviously you are the perfect victim for anything to happen. Like, I grew up poor and that did not happen, to me. So I appreciate that you shared these stories, and that it will cause people to really think about how society has played into what stories we care about and whose stories we care about. I think it's with everything going on, of course, there's a high focus on podcasts of color, which I think is amazing. And I think it's great because it's podcasts I haven't learned about, because I was like, oh, I didn't know that there was this or whatever. Like, I knew, kind of a staple in the genre, but I didn't really know about other smaller creators who were creating podcasts about victims of color and crimes and things like that. So I think it's really, really interesting. And I hope that the tide turns there, because I think that, every victim deserves to have their story told in a compassionate way, and in a way that fascinates you just as much as a crime, committed by Jeffrey Dahmer or by Ted Bundy. Sure, it may not be as prolific, but it shouldn't matter, the circumstances behind the person's life of why, they were murdered or anything like that. I think it's truly just really, sadly, a game of chance, if you will, and the people that they know.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I guess and also it'll make, it's like the right thing to do, and it'll make us all a lot safer. There was an article in the Atlantic a few months ago about a guy who was a serial rapist, and basically like some of his first victims who came forward, one of the women she wasn't even a current sex worker. She had done some sex work like decades ago or something, but it was in her file somehow. She tried to report this guy as like a violent sex offender, and the police completely didn't consider her credible because, this apparently like to this, and this guy was like a sex crimes prosecutor or sex crimes, like on the sex crimes unit or something. So you would think that he would have known better.
Yeah.
But no, he just completely discounted her. And of course, this guy goes on to reoffend. So often people who are like seeking out, like people who are like preying on people are looking for the most vulnerable. And if we sort of discount the stories of people who are vulnerable, like, sex workers or trans women or the homeless or people who are addicted to drugs, if we sort of like don't pay attention when those people are attacked or assaulted or murdered, then, we're not learning what is actually happening. And those people are so often the victims. But it's just, again, it's like this obsession with the idea of like the innocent victim, as if there's any such thing as like a guilty victim.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't understand that. So I'm glad you said that. So I like I said, I could not put the book down. I was, I get a lot of requests for new authors and new books that are coming out and stuff like that. And I was just like, you know what, let's give it a chance. And I'm so glad that we started with you because it is truly a fascinating book, honestly. I finished it in a day because I was just like, I couldn't put it down. It was
great to hear.
Yeah. I read a lot too. So like I read a bunch of different stuff, and I love true crime in terms of reading about it and learning as much as possible. So it's really hard to capture my attention because I am like, oh God, I've heard that before. Oh yeah. So it was a lot of new interesting things and a new perspective that I got to consider when I was reading this, and was like, oh yeah, like the Columbine thing, like I said, kind of threw me off, and I was like, holy crap. But, even having that conversation with you earlier about it, it kind of just shifts my perspective again. And it's just like, yeah, you don't realize, that they created these characters like in American Horror Story to be, affectionate figures that you are going to be like, oh my God, he's so hot. Oh my God, he's so great. And then the surprise is, oh, guess what? You've liked a killer all along and you had no idea. And I think that that's the point. It's, it disarms you, and it's on purpose.
Right.
So,
right. And then people are like, why do girls like these killer boys? And it's like, well, it's on this huge TV show, like,
of course they do. Of course they do. So real quick, before we open it up for questions, and I will unlock the screens in case anybody is brave enough to join us online. If you're not, don't worry about it. It is okay. I know sometimes it is a little intimidating to get on screen. But if you have any questions, if you're in the Facebook chat, go ahead and submit those there. Or if you're in the Get Vocal chat, submit it there. Welcome to our new friends who joined us earlier today, and I did not say hello. But if you are interested in receiving a copy of this book, or rather winning it in the giveaway, all you have to do is email tcfcpod@gmail.com with your name, mailing address, and the title of the book, Savage Appetites, in the subject. If you don't do that, you don't get it. Okay. But along with the book, you are also going to get a bunch of TCFC goodies. So stickers, bumper stickers, buttons, holographic stickers. I mean, like literally whatever I have around the house that was supposed to be used for our True Crime Podcast Festival. That got canceled till next year because of COVID. So thanks, COVID. But that will be included here. And of course, if I have any other podcast gear that my friends have sent me, you will get that as well as a big goodie pack. So remember, tcfcpod@gmail.com and Savage Appetites in the title so that you can get your copy or maybe win a copy of this. But Rachel, why don't you tell us where we can find your book, and then of course where we can find you?
You can find the book, I get wherever fine books are sold. I think that's great that bookshop.org, hopefully people know about that, but that allows like local independent bookstores near you to send you the book. And it's like just as efficient as Amazon, but that supports local business, so that's really cool. If you just search for Savage Appetites, there's an audiobook too. I'm for some reason I'm like nervous to listen to the audiobook, but people tell me that she did a really good job. And yeah, ebook too available. And I'm on Twitter way too much.
It's okay.
At Rachel Monroe, or otherwise around on the internet.
So you are in actually, and I'm glad we're towards the end. So we've talked about the true crime. You are in Marfa, which I think is so fun because last year, me and my husband went to Terlingua to stay in the bubble and everything, and enjoyed our fun little camp there, if you will. I don't camp, it's glamping for me. So we stayed in the bubble. It was amazing, but we went during the weekday, and I was like, you know what, let's go to Marfa. We can see what it's like. And it was like dead town because it was like a Wednesday, I think, or something, and it was dead. But it's so tiny. So how did you end up in Marfa? Because you're not from Texas. How do you land there?
You should read I wrote a true crime story about Terlingua, about a murder that happened in Terlingua.
Is it at the restaurant?
Yeah, at La Kiva.
Yes. My friends from All Crime No Cattle, who also are bone diggers, much like you, covered it in their show, and they did such a great job.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that one was like, oof.
It's weird.
Heartbreaking story. Yeah, I don't know. It's funny. Marfa's a special little town for people who don't know it. It's kind of out in the middle of nowhere. Like the nearest city is El Paso, 3 hours away. Mm-hmm. We're like 70 miles from the U.S.-Mexico border, which is where I found that bone. Cow bone, not human bone.
Yes, cow bone, guys.
And all my work was kind of happening online, so I knew I could live kind of anywhere. I drove through here on a road trip, and I just was like, wow, small town Texas. It's like population of about 2,000, so it's like the size of my high school. Mm-hmm. But a lot of artists and writers, creative people live here, so it has that creative element mixed into this small town, which makes it a really fascinating place. And I just kind of stopped here and thought it would be temporary. And then the next thing you know, it's like
8 years later. You're there. No, it's a gorgeous, seriously, it's such a gorgeous place. Like
beautiful. Yeah, I forget that sometimes, but
it is so pretty. When we were in Terlingua, I was like, dang, dude, we should get a house out here, like a little spot to come, because it is so serene. You're right by the national park. Big Bend? Oh my God. Bad Texan. So sorry, friends. But yeah, it was incredible. Like seeing the desert at night, seeing the clear skies. Like it's just something. I live in a burb, so it's not like I get that anyway, but it's something that's so great and so wonderful. And it was, especially if you guys get the chance and you're in the area, head to Terlingua at the base camp. They have wonderful staff there. And the bubble is so awesome because you're literally encapsulated in a bubble, and you can see the night sky, and it's so beautiful. And then you can go hang out in Marfa when it's much more lively than it was when I was there. But it was such a cool place, and I really want to go back whenever we can truly explore Marfa. There was a cute little coffee shop that was right around the corner by the courthouse and everything.
There's so many coffee shops now.
I know. But yeah, we for sure want to go. So go back again. So we will probably make it out there one more time. And Rachel, like I said, she said herself, she's on Twitter. So feel free to interact with her, talk to her about the book. It's, like I said, it's incredible for a true crime read. I really enjoyed it. And I'm a hard win when it comes to books, you guys. So, and I don't just say that because she's here. I truly mean that. It did capture my attention truly. And it, like I said, it is really, really hard to do because I am so ingrained in true crime. It's ridiculous. So again, thanks everybody for showing up. And we didn't have any questions, I think, in the chat. Facebook is a little slow. So if you guys are asking questions, sorry. Yeah. Twitter ask questions. And like I said, I'll announce the winner at the next live stream on Thursday on the Get Vocal stream. Then, and now that Rachel, you have a Get Vocal account, you should totally think about hosting your own little live stream about your book and things like that, or having other podcasters on, you could totally do it. But thank you again so much for joining us on the podcast, on the live stream. You are our first official author to come on the live stream to kick off our true crime book thing. So I really, really appreciate it. And we are definitely looking forward to whatever else you have to put out, because you are a great writer. I can't wait to read what else you got coming out. Any projects down the line after this book?
I've got some stories that I'm doing. Most of them are not about true crime.
Yeah.
I'm doing a story. I get to go hang out with a bunch of like TikTok teen celebrities.
Oh my God, so exciting.
Next, hopefully if the COVID dies down a little bit.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna.
I love TikTok. It's such a great waste of time for me.
Go to the Sway House.
Oh my gosh, I can't believe you're going there. You know there's a bunch of drama going on right now. So I love it.
Great. It's just, there's always drama, but then it's really intense.
It's really great. Okay, sorry guys. You're probably like, what the hell, TikTok? Yes, it's great.
Hopefully there won't be a murder.
Yeah, let's hope not. But if there is, I will cover it. I'm just kidding. Well, I'm going to go ahead and stop the broadcast. And let's see. Oh my gosh, my thing's in my way. So yes, stop the broadcast. Thanks